Sarah Monroe is a freelance illustrator who lives in a small cottage on the quiet edge of Maple Hollow, a sleepy town nestled between forested hills and winding country roads. Her home is surrounded by tall trees, blooming wildflowers, and the steady hush of nature. It's a place where time moves slower, where the world feels just a little softer. Her days follow a gentle rhythm. She wakes early to the sound of birdsong, brews a warm cup of coffee, and takes slow morning walks with her sketchbook tucked under her arm. Along the trail, she often stops to draw a twisted branch, a curious rabbit, or the way sunlight scatters through the leaves. The rest of her time is spent indoors, where soft music plays as she sketches from memory and imagination, bringing stories to life in quiet detail. Sarah lives alone, but never feels lonely. She enjoys the stillness, the routine, the calm. Yet behind her quiet nature lies a tender heart, always open, always ready to care for the forgotten corners of the world. Whether it's a withering plant on her porch or a bird with a broken wing, Sarah notices the things others overlook. And she never turns away. It was a warm spring afternoon, the kind that felt like a gentle invitation to slow down. The sun filtered through the branches above, casting soft golden patterns across the forest trail. A light breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and damp earth, rustling the leaves overhead in a lazy, soothing rhythm. It was the kind of day where every step felt like a small blessing. Sarah had taken this path countless times before. Her boots made a familiar crunch on the dry soil beneath her feet, mingling with the sounds of birds calling to one another from the treetops. Every so often, a squirrel would dart across the trail, pausing briefly to study her before vanishing into the brush. She smiled to herself, comforted by the routine. It was a day like many before, quiet, familiar, and beautiful, in all the ways that rarely get noticed. But beneath the calm, something unexpected waited just ahead. Suddenly, a soft sound stirred the quiet, a faint whimper, barely noticeable at first. It was distant and shaky, like a voice struggling to be heard. Sarah froze mid-step, her breath catching in her throat. The forest, once filled with birdsong and rustling leaves, suddenly felt still. The sound came again, trembling, broken, and full of pain. It wasn't the rustle of an animal in the underbrush. It was something alive and suffering. She turned her head slowly, her ears straining to find the direction. Her heart beat a little faster, guided more by instinct than logic. Without thinking, Sarah stepped off the trail. The ground was uneven, covered in dry twigs and fallen leaves, but she moved carefully, brushing aside low branches that snagged her sweater. Tall grasses reached up to her waist as she pushed forward, following the fragile sound. With each step, the whimper grew clearer, still soft, but steady now, as though whatever was making it sensed help was near. Sarah didn't know what she was about to find, but something inside her told her to keep going. There, tucked between an old leaning fence post and a mess of tangled brush, lay a tiny puppy, barely more than skin and bone. Its body was twisted awkwardly, pinned to the ground with rough rope that dug into its sides. Around its legs, tight plastic ties bit into the fur, cutting off any chance of movement. The dirt beneath it was cracked and dry, baking in the warm spring sun, and the puppy's fur was matted with dust, leaves, and dried blood. As Sarah stepped closer, her breath caught. The puppy didn't lift its head. Its eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, blinked up at her slowly. Eyes that looked not with fear, but with something far heavier. Exhaustion. Pain. A silent plea. Its small chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and streaks of moisture cut lines through the dirt on its cheeks, tears, or maybe just the remnants of suffering too deep for a creature so small. Still, it didn't bark. It didn't struggle. It simply lay there, broken and still, staring at her as if it had already accepted whatever came next. But something in those eyes clung to hope. And in that fragile moment, Sarah knew. This little one hadn't completely given up. Not yet. Sarah dropped to her knees beside the helpless puppy, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice trembling as she reached out with both hands. "I've got you now. You're safe." The puppy didn't flinch. It only blinked slowly, as if it barely had the strength to stay awake. She opened the small pocket of her sketch bag with fumbling fingers and pulled out the only tool she had, her delicate art scissors. With slow, careful movements, she began snipping through the cruel plastic ties around its legs, her breath catching every time it whimpered. "I know," she murmured. "I'm sorry. Almost done." The rope came last, rough and tangled, but she managed to unwind it without pulling too hard on the pup's raw skin. As the final tie gave way, the puppy didn't bolt or squirm. It simply collapsed into her lap like a tiny bundle of fur and bone, too weak to resist, too tired to understand. Sarah instinctively wrapped it in her soft sweater, tucking its frail body close to her chest. She could feel its shallow breaths against her ribs, light and fragile, like paper fluttering in the wind. Shielding it from the sun with her arms, she pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed the nearest animal clinic. Her voice cracked as she explained the situation, but they told her to come immediately. Without wasting another second, Sarah scooped the puppy into her arms and ran. Down the trail, through the grass, and straight to her car. She didn't look back. The drive to Pine Brook Animal Clinic was only 15 minutes on the map, but to Sarah, it felt like an hour. Every stop sign, every curve in the road made her chest tighten. She kept glancing over at the passenger seat, where the tiny puppy lay wrapped snugly in her sweater. Its small body was barely moving, its breaths shallow and spaced too far apart. Each time it exhaled, she counted the seconds, praying for the next inhale to come. "Just hold on," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the tires on asphalt. "You're going to be okay. I promise." She reached across the seat, resting her hand gently on its side, needing to feel the rise and fall of its chest to reassure herself that it was still there, still fighting. Sarah didn't let her foot off the gas for a moment longer than necessary. Her knuckles were white around the steering wheel, her heart pounding with every mile that passed. The radio was off. The world outside the windows blurred by, fields, trees, and empty roads. But none of it mattered. All her focus was locked on the fragile life beside her. She didn't know the little dog's name or where it had come from, but in that moment, she knew she would do everything in her power to help it survive. At the clinic, the front door barely closed behind her when two veterinary technicians rushed forward. Their eyes widened at the sight of the bundle in Sarah's arms, but their hands moved with steady urgency. "We've got him," one of them said gently, lifting the tiny puppy with practiced care. They didn't waste a second, turning down the hallway and disappearing into the treatment room as Sarah followed closely behind, her chest tight and her legs shaky. The fluorescent lights above seemed too bright, the hallway too long. Sarah barely noticed the smell of antiseptic or the buzz of quiet voices behind closed doors. All she could focus on was the little shadow of fur ahead, cradled now in gloved hands. Inside the treatment room, a calm, capable woman stood waiting. Dr. Lillian, the on-call vet, with kind eyes and sleeves rolled up. She gave Sarah a quick nod, then turned to the pup. "Severely dehydrated," she murmured under her breath, checking the gums and pulse. "Skin damage from friction. Possible internal bruising. No visible fractures." Her voice was focused, but underneath there was concern. They began rehydration therapy right away, slipping a small IV into the puppy's leg. Another tech applied ointment to the worst of the wounds, while a third drew a blood sample to check for infection or toxins. The room was a blur of quiet efficiency. Machines beeping softly, bandages being unwrapped, saline dripping steadily into the IV. Sarah stood just inside the door, her arms wrapped tightly around her own body, fingers clutching the inside of her coat. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just watched, barely breathing, as strangers fought to save the life she had carried out of the woods. After what felt like hours, though it had barely been 30 minutes, Dr. Lillian finally stepped back into the waiting room. Her face was calm, her voice low and reassuring. "He's stable," she said softly. "It was close. He was right on the edge. But you got him here in time." Sarah exhaled so sharply she almost stumbled backward. The tension in her chest broke all at once, and her knees wobbled as though they might give out beneath her. She sank slowly into a nearby chair, pressing her hand to her mouth, eyes brimming with sudden tears. Relief hit her like a wave. The vet knelt slightly so their eyes were level, her expression kind but serious. "He's not out of the woods yet," she continued. "He'll need fluids, medication, and rest, probably weeks of close care. But his heart is strong. He's fighting." Sarah nodded slowly, her voice still caught in her throat. Dr. Lillian offered a faint smile. "If someone's willing to foster him, to give him a quiet, stable place to heal, I believe he has a real shot at a full recovery." The words settled in Sarah's chest like a promise, a question unspoken, already answered in her heart. As the vet stood, one of the technicians entered the room holding something in her hand, a tattered strip of faded fabric. "We found this tied around his neck," she said quietly, offering it to Dr. Lillian. It wasn't much, just a worn cloth collar, frayed along the edges, the metal tag so rusted it barely held its shape. Dr. Lillian examined it, then squinted at the back of the tag. "There's something scratched here. A name? And a partial number." Sarah leaned forward. The tag was rough, handmade. No microchip, no official ID. But there it was, barely visible. A phone number missing the last 2 digits. They called it in, hoping for a match. After several tries, a voice finally answered. An elderly woman with a soft, hesitant tone. When Sarah explained why she was calling, there was a long pause. "We gave him away a while back," the woman said, her voice trembling. "My daughter's boyfriend didn't want to keep him, and we thought he'd be going to a nice farm. A man said he'd take good care of him." The words hung in the air like smoke, uncertain, drifting, full of regret. Dr. Lillian nodded quietly. "It happens more often than people think." Sarah lowered her gaze, her heart twisting. He hadn't just gotten lost. He'd been handed off, forgotten, passed along like a burden, until someone had left him tied under the sun to fend for himself. He'd cried, waited, and suffered. And no one had come. Until now. She looked through the small window into the treatment room where the dog lay sleeping. Still, but no longer alone. He had a name. He had a past. But more importantly, now. He had a future. Sarah placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "No one's giving you away again." Of course, Sarah said yes. She didn't even pause. The moment Dr. Lillian asked if she'd be willing to foster him, Something deep inside her answered before her voice could. She nodded, through quiet tears, a soft, "Yes, absolutely," escaping her lips. He had been discarded, left behind by others, but she wouldn't be another chapter in that pattern. She would be the break in it. That evening, back at her little cottage, Sarah moved quietly through her home, turning a quiet corner of the living room into a space just for him. She laid out soft towels and cushions, arranged pillows around the edges, and plugged in a heating pad to keep the chill from his thin frame. Nearby, she placed a bowl of warm broth, a washcloth, and a small journal, where she would begin keeping notes about his progress. As he slept under a soft fleece blanket, Sarah sat beside him and traced a gentle finger across the top of his head. His fur was still patchy and tangled, but there was something so brave in the way he breathed, even now. She watched his tiny chest rise and fall, then whispered the name that had been growing in her heart since the moment she saw him. "Dusty," she said softly, "because you came from the dirt, and you're still standing. You're still here." That first night, she fed him warm broth, drop by drop, gently dabbing his face and cleaning each wound with care. When he grew too tired to eat, she let him sleep curled against her chest, his head tucked under her chin, his breath warm and shallow against her skin. In the days that followed, Dusty began to change. His eyes, once glazed with pain, started to follow her when she moved around the room. He began to shift his weight, then stand, then take a few uncertain steps. Each movement was wobbly but determined. When she entered the room, his tail, weak but willing, began to thump softly against the blanket. He wasn't just surviving now. He was beginning to heal. Dusty became a part of Sarah's world in the most natural, quiet way. He followed her from room to room like a shadow with soft paws, curled beside her feet as she painted, rested his head in her lap while she sketched, and gave small, happy barks at the flutter of leaves outside the window. His presence filled the little cottage with a warmth that hadn't been there before, like sunlight slowly spilling into a room that had gone dim without anyone noticing. He waited at the door each morning when she slipped on her boots, eager to join her on walks, even if he could only manage a few steps at first. He'd trot beside her, ears perked, tail wagging, pausing now and then to sniff the world like it was all new again. And in many ways, it was, for both of them. The neighbors began to notice a change in Sarah, too. Her smile came more often now, unforced and easy. Her steps, once quiet and measured, had taken on a lightness, as if something heavy had finally been set down. People saw the difference in her posture, in her eyes. They saw the way she laughed when Dusty chased a moth, or barked at his reflection in the window. What had begun as a rescue had quietly grown into a bond, deep, gentle, and unspoken, between a once lonely artist and the small soul who now made her life feel whole, but that would soon change. One gray, rainy morning, the phone rang. Sarah recognized the clinic's number before she even picked it up. She pressed the receiver to her ear, and Dr. Lillian's familiar voice came gently through the line. "A family saw Dusty's photo on our bulletin board," she said. "They read his story. They're interested in adopting him." Sarah stood very still, her fingers tightening around the phone. She had known this moment would come, had agreed to it from the start. Fostering meant healing, then letting go. Still, her chest ached at the thought. She looked across the room where Dusty lay curled on the rug, one ear twitching in his sleep. With quiet hands, she packed up his things later that day. His food, the blanket he loved, the little toy she had bought him on their first walk into town. She knelt beside him, kissed the soft spot between his eyes, and whispered goodbye through a rush of quiet tears. Dusty didn't understand, but he looked at her with eyes that trusted her anyway. For the next few days, the cottage felt still. Too still. Sarah tried to work, to draw, to walk without stopping at every spot where he used to sit. And then, on a sunless Thursday afternoon, the phone rang again. It was the clinic. The family had backed out. They weren't ready. They'd decided Dusty was too much. There was no hesitation in Sarah's voice. Not this time. "Yes," she said, calm and clear. "I'll come right now." She didn't ask why. She didn't need time to think. She simply grabbed her keys, opened the door, and headed out. Back to the little life she had never truly said goodbye to. When Dusty saw her again, there was no pause, no moment of confusion. The instant Sarah stepped into the clinic, his head snapped toward her, ears perked, eyes wide. Then he launched forward, clumsy, eager, tail wagging so hard it became a blur of motion. He ran straight into her arms like he had been waiting every second for this moment, as if some missing piece had finally returned. He whimpered with joy, licking her face with soft, desperate kisses, pawing at her shoulders, pressing his head into the curve of her neck like he never wanted to let go again. The Tex smiled, stepping quietly out of the room, giving them space. It was clear to everyone watching. Dusty had chosen. Sarah knelt to the floor, wrapping both arms around him, burying her face in the warm patch of fur behind his ear. She felt the tension she'd been holding for days melt all at once. And this time, she didn't doubt. She didn't wonder what came next. She pulled him close and whispered, steady and certain, "You're already home." Now, Sarah's walks are never quiet, in the same way they used to be. Dusty trots beside her, his steps growing stronger with each passing day. He still stumbles now and then, especially when chasing butterflies or the rustle of leaves, but his spirit is steady, joyful, full of life. The woods feel different now too, less like a place of solitude, and more like a place where healing once began. Every morning, they walk the same trail where she first heard his cry, where tangled weeds once hid a soul in pain. And every morning, Dusty pauses there, just for a moment, as if remembering. Sometimes, strangers stop them along the path, drawn to the scruffy dog with the bright eyes and tail that never stops wagging. "What's his story?" they ask, kneeling to pet him. Sarah always smiles gently, her gaze drifting toward the trees. And then she tells them about the day she stepped off the trail and found him hidden beneath the brush, bound, broken, silent, and waiting for someone to love him enough to bring him home. And every time she finishes the story, Dusty presses against her side like he understands. Because now, they belong to each other, fully and forever. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And let us know in the comments. What would you have named Dusty?